from now then. Perfect. Just another thing for everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or ask them at the end. And this will give us the opportunity to carry on through the presentation, and we'll answer any outstanding questions at the end of the talk.
Okay, so like I said, it's a very important topic because it's obviously affecting students this year with regards to their internal assessments, teacher assessed grades, but also it could be a component of what gets marked next year as well. So it's a really important discussion, what we're doing today. So just a little bit of intro. OIC, Oxford International College, topped the league table in 2019, 91.84% A-star to A grades. We were the only school who had above 90% in their A-level results in 2019. 2020, there was no league table because, as we know, exams were cancelled last year. However, we had 98% A-star to A grades. And by our calculation, we would have had at least been, even without the U-turn by the government, where they had accepted all the calculated grades last year, even without that, we would have been on the range of 95, 96%. So that would have still put us as #1, even if there was the league, since if there was a league table last year, then that would have placed us as being top in the country as well. So in terms of university admissions at OIC, 75% of students obtained A-star, AA or better in the A-level examinations, 100% success rate into medical school, 60% of the cohort had progressed into G5 universities, Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, LSE, UCL, 25% success rate for Cambridge, and then 100% success rate to Russell Group University. So this was in 2019. 2020 university offers or university destinations were overall G5 university success rate were 45%, 50% success rate to Oxford, UCL, non-medicine was 85.2%, medicine is 24%, Imperial around 55% for non-medicine and medicine 14%, LSE 62.5%. I think it's very important to explain these percentages. First of all, in 2020, this was a huge challenge because of the changes in the assessment. So there were no exams in 2020. So despite the barriers that we had and the challenges we had, our students still received epic university destinations, purely because there was a very good strategy behind their application process and the academic planning as well. And also it's important to understand that for medicine, there is a 7.5% cap for international students. And even for local students, the level of competition is very, very tough. That's for medicine. And then when you look at non-medical courses, engineering, law, economics, PPE, all these courses, when you apply to G5 universities, they're also extremely competitive in that sense. So the level of acceptance is normally below 10% for these courses. So it's very important to understand that it's one thing looking at university destinations as a whole. It's another thing looking at the level of competition for each of these subjects groups and then applying to top universities is very, very different. So when you look at G5 universities and you look at non-medical courses, so engineering, law, economics, the level of acceptance rate is below 10%. When you look at medical schools, the level of acceptance, well, it's 7.5% cap given by, set by the government. So it's, these are very competitive figures. So against the barriers of what happened last year with no exams, and again this year as well with no exams, getting into top universities is getting a lot more competitive because the universities don't have all the academic data for the students. Neither do they want students on the basis of just grade inflation. So taking into account these things, Oxford University, for example, have introduced Cambridge universities have introduced things like oversubscription clauses. Oxford universities have made the lowest offer that they've ever made since 2013. So all these things have an impact, and it has a domino impact over the next few years. And that is why having very good academic planning as well as career planning is very, very important. Next slide, please. So a little bit about myself. I'm the Chief Education Officer at OIC since 2017. I sit as an interview panel at various medical schools, but also have a lot of connection and I do a lot of work with the G5 universities for all courses. I'm the founder of Cardiff Sixth Form College. It was the first time in the history of British education that a sixth form college, in particular with no sort of traditional history, topped the league table, not only topped it once, but maintained the top position for 10 years, 9 consecutive years, until I joined OIC in 2019, and OIC topped in 2019, as well as it would have topped in 2020 if there was a league table. In 2011, I won the Science Tutor of the Year award, received my award from the Pearson Teaching Awards. I was also given an award by the Welsh Women of the Year award in the education category in 2015, and also by the Class Nobel Educator of Distinction Award given in 2015, and I did a TEDx talk in 2016. Thank you. Next slide, please, Rafi. Most importantly, I take great pride, besides the academic achievement of the schools that I either have created or have changed, both in Cardiff Sixth Form College and OIC. I take great pride in my university admissions record. In fact, it's actually nearing to 300 students now who have admitted into Oxford, Cambridge, London School of Economics, Imperial College London, for all courses: engineering, law, PPE, economics. We've had students who've gone into anthropology. We have students who've gone into geography, land economy, loads of different subjects. But getting into G5 universities is below 10% rate. And for these competitive courses, there are courses where it's 50% acceptance rate. So, for example, classical civilization or modern studies, modern languages. These subjects, obviously, you have 50% acceptance rate compared to subjects like engineering, economics, law, which has less than 10% acceptance rate. So therefore, when you look at admissions statistics, it's very important to see how much of that admission statistics is based on the subjects that students have applied for. Because you could have a situation where a school is sending around 60 students to Oxbridge, but out of that 60 students, very important to identify how much of that is actually due to A, the subject that they've chosen, and B, how many of that actually is down to the number of British versus international students. Over 300 students have been admitted to medical schools, and 100% of students receive offers to Russell Group universities in the UK. We also have a growing number of students applying to the US as well, and they're getting into Ivy League universities such as Harvard, Stanford, MIT. My first applicant, actually, my first student that I had assisted in their university journey to the US, had an offer to Harvard as well as Cambridge. He decided to stay in Cambridge. So that's basically the admissions record, and we take great pride in terms of making sure that the career planning is in parallel to the academic planning. So COVID-19 has changed everything about university applications, and this has an impact, a domino impact over the next 2 to 3 years. First of all, as we all know, that last year was based on center assessed grades, which means that schools and colleges assess students most likely to have achieved if exams hadn't gone ahead. Now, the calculated grades was based on the UK Office of Qualifications algorithm. Nearly 40% of A-level final grades downgraded from center assessment grades. And that's substantial based on the algorithm that Ofqual, Office of Qualification, had came up with. 40% drop is substantial. Due to coronavirus, UK students did not sit exams this year in 2020 as schools were closed, and A-level students were given grades by the official exam regulator Ofqual. For each pupil, teachers were asked to supply an estimated grade and a ranking compared with every other pupil at the school with the same estimated grade. Then these were then put through an algorithm or mathematical procedure, and with the idea that the grade last year would have been consistent with how schools have performed in the past. So that's how the algorithm worked in 2020. There is no algorithm this year, and information has just been released in terms of what they're doing this year, which I'll come into in a minute. But it's just important to understand the context of what happened and where we're at now, and how did it come to this position, and what is the impact over the next few years. So what happened as a result of the algorithm is that most students received downgraded A-level results. Like I said, 40% were downgraded. And that system prompted immediate criticism from schools, parents, and students, as you probably have seen in the, read in the news last year. Monday, 17th of August, so the results came out on the 13th of August. Monday, 17th of August, the government dropped the scheme, and this was the policy U-turn. And the result that students ultimately got was center assessed grades, which were their own teachers' assessments. And that's what we ended up with last year with the center assessment. So algorithm started off with, algorithm included ranking and schools' previous performances. Then that was the downgrade of 40% of results, A-level results, and similar, I think, in GCSE as well. And that had prompted into a government U-turn. So where we're at now is 2020 A-level results changed the university admissions landscape for all school years, whether they were year 11, year 10, year 11, year 12, year 13. It changed the whole landscape. So last year, all of the UK's top universities admitted more students than they were expecting because of the U-turn that happened on the 17th of August. They admitted more students, and in normal years they would normally admit ×3 or ×4 per place, because universities always make more offers than places available, because students would either choose not to accept, or they can go elsewhere, or they don't get the grade, so they always make more offers. But last year was a troubling year for the universities, in particular top universities. So 24 of them, including Oxford and Cambridge, have said they needed to have clarity regarding this year's grades. The level of grade inflation this summer, so this year, will have implications for universities' admissions and course capacity. And that is why, if you see this year's trajectory, many universities have not been making offers. Many of the top universities have not been making offers, or have been more conservative with their offers. Oxford made 9% fewer offers this year in 2021 than in 2020. And this is the fewest offers Oxford has made in a decade, and the first time the number of offers has declined year on year since 2013. And that is, again, a significant drop, because when you look at the number of students that Oxford, the level of competition is already very tough. And then when you look at the drop in terms of the number of offers that Oxford has made, that has an impact, because if you look at, again, the percentages of British students versus international students, the drop has been seen significantly within the international category compared to the British students. But even within the British category as well, they are looking at students that come from particular backgrounds, or they're looking at assisting students that come from state schools in particular, or not necessarily all state schools either. They've got to come from a particular background, or a particular, like say free school meals and sort of thing. So there is a shift in terms of the social polarization to make sure that they are supporting students who have been affected the most. Cambridge University have also introduced a oversubscription clauses. So even if they make offers, there is an oversubscription clause that if the demand for the course, if they've made too many offers, then they have the right to pull that. But of course, there will be some format and process around that to make sure that students who do have offers are able to maintain the offers that been given to them. Now, 2021 applicants this year face competition not just from from their own cohort, but also from the 2020 deferred entries. And this year, there has been a lot more conservative approach towards making those offers in any case. So in 2020, due to cancelled exams and other COVID-19 related uncertainties, between 2 to 10% of all A-level graduates deferred their university entry to 2021. So that had an impact, significant impact on places. But most of the impact has actually come due to the nervousness around grade inflation and whether or not students are going to be well prepared for the next stage of their progression. A lot of the universities that I've spoken to, their biggest concern is even if they just ignored the grade inflation, are students really prepared for the next stage? So this is why it's very important for parents and for teachers to not forget that whilst we may be able to get them through the qualification, are we actually preparing them well enough for university level? And if we're not, these universities are already very conservative in terms of their offers. And this has an impact, like I said, over the next 3 years. It's not just an impact of last year and this year. There's a domino effect. And because there's a domino effect, we've got to make sure that we are preparing them, A, to get a qualification, but B, to be well prepared for the next stage. And if they can demonstrate that they're well prepared to be able to get into the next stage of their education, they will be far better in terms of their university applications as well. Last year, grade inflation led to serious problems as many universities found themselves having to admit more students than they had capacity for. So as so many students had met the requisite grades, this will not be allowed to happen this year. So the offer places ratio is about 1.5 to 1, usually it's 3 to 1. So this year is 1 to 1.5, making each university places a lot more competitive and more difficult to gain entry into. And as I mentioned before, Cambridge have introduced, oversubscription clauses in their offer letters. Oxford University has made the lowest number of offers in a decade, and the first time the number of offers has declined year on year since 2013. So this associated offer per places ratio may continue to spill into the next 2 years, and that's what I've been saying about the domino effect, because it's not going to be easy to take away something that's been introduced, even if it's introduced in the pandemic period, but they're going to want to see how things progresses as we move forward. Sorry, Rafi, the next slide.
Sorry, my computer has completely
okay.
I'm just getting back to where we were. Apologies.
No problem.
We're here.
Yeah. So academic strategy is more crucial than ever before. Considering, I think it was just important to explain how did we get to this position? And it's not just the pandemic, it's because of decisions. Well, it's obviously due to the pandemic, but it's decisions that have been taken throughout this course of action that has a lasting impact, at least the domino effect for a couple of years, if not more, but so at least for a couple of years. And that's why it's very important in this period to ensure that we understand how we get to this position, B, understand that we are, in a more slightly more challenging level in terms of making sure that our children, our students get their academic qualifications, but also making sure that they're well prepared for the next stage of their education life. And that is what universities are greatly concerned about. So academic strategy is more crucial than ever. So Head Start and having an early planning, having a Head Start is very important. So for those students who are in year 10, having a Head Start for year 11, again, year 11 to year 12, year 13, very important. So early planning is extremely crucial. You've got to put the time and effort in, of course, because again, the bar and the challenges against this cohort of students are actually much greater than ever before. And support and assistance by trained specialists is very crucial as well. So it's not just having an ad hoc support, but having an integrated support. What I mean by that is having a system where you can demonstrate evidence of the work that you have done outside school, say, or outside what you normally do or given, that can demonstrate, can be very helpful for universities and also help your schools to show how much work you've put down as well. So it is very important that students identify and address any gaps in their knowledge, both for the upcoming teacher assess grades or internal assessment that is coming up very soon. Most schools are going down the route of internal assessments, which they're going to apply in the month of May or June. By 18th of June, we have to submit the teacher assess grade. So this year, unlike last year, there's no algorithm this year, but according to the guidance that just been received recently, the teacher assess grades will still be compared to school's performance in the last 3 years. So they're still looking at that. They will be assessing the evidence that the students have taken, have been, being able to provide to the school, or the school sets the evidence for the students. So they're still going to be looking at that. So in a way, although they've taken away the formal exam assessment, in a way the assessments are still carrying on. It's just that instead of having the evidences through a formal set of exams, what they're saying is that they are looking at evidences that are set by the school, and the exam boards are also giving papers to the schools to utilize as form of evidence. So that's going to be utilized for the teacher assessed grades, and they're still going to compare with the school's previous performances as well. So although there's no algorithm, there's still going to be a comparison, because the exam boards are tasked to ensure that the grade inflation doesn't rise, more than what it was last year. And last year was pretty high already. So that's what the exam boards are going to be tasked. So besides the algorithm, actually everything else stays the same. So therefore, the internal assessments that the schools are going to be setting in the month of May and June until 18th of June, that's going to be really crucial. But more than that, is also important that for you later on for university admissions, it's very important to be able to demonstrate to the university that they are well prepared for the next stage. And even if you feel that perhaps in your schools they are limited in terms of their resources, anything that you can do outside school can also help to provide the evidence to the universities as well. So there's two things to bear in mind. One is the academic strategy to get the qualification itself, but secondly is the career planning for university later on, because as I said, the university entry is getting a lot more tougher than it used to be, but at the same time you also want to be able to get the qualifications, but then you got to prove and validate that qualification, because the number one issue for universities are students going to be well prepared for the next stage. Number two, grade inflation. Number three is the validation of the teacher assessed grades. So last year, for example, a lot of our students took deferred exam in the autumn because the deferred exam was able to validate the center assessed grade. So validation is very crucial in order to ease, the universities' sort of apprehensiveness, nervousness around whether or not they should be selecting these students. So in a normal year, they would be perhaps offering these students, but this year, for example, we have seen significant drop in number of offers. Now, our students doing quite well in terms of their, despite the challenges, and I think that's due to the fact that we've been able to showcase that they're progressing to the next stage of their education. B, we've been able to demonstrate the validation of their academic results through the deferred exam. But C, the students have been able to provide a lot of evidence of both academic and supercurricular activities. So that's the three things that's very important. Sorry, Rafi, can you go back the slide? So the changing process, as we said, COVID-19 has changed the admissions process. University of Cambridge oversubscription may mean that some students will have to change subjects or defer their offers. And again, it's very important to ensure that we provide as many evidence as much as possible to ensure that you don't lose from the oversubscription clause. Less certainty about the value of grades, so therefore there's going to be more value placed on personal statement, references, and live interviews as well. And some of the G5 universities which have not interviewed in the past may be looking to interview moving forward. And of course, the effect of inflated grades and cohorts are to be felt beyond 2022. That's what the prediction is so far. Next slide, please, Rafi. So understanding the internal assessments and CAGs is what is crucial in making sure that that students have an understanding about what's happening out this year. So this year, students will be graded by their own teachers based on a range of criteria, including internal assessments, mock exams, mini tests, coursework, predicted grades, and other qualitative means of assessment. So when calculating their grades, schools will consider mocks, mini tests, and work already completed that can be provided as evidence, but they're going to want to see as the whole cohort, not just individual evidences. So again, it has to be set like an assessment for the whole cohort, as you would have in a normal formal exam. So as I said earlier on, apart from the algorithm, nothing much have actually changed substantially in terms of how the students are going to be assessed this year. Teachers can use question banks provided by exam boards. So I think a lot of schools are going to go down that route, using question banks provided by the exam boards. So effectively, as I said, again, there's not much difference from having a formal assessments, apart from the fact that it's actually done in school and marked internally. But this internal marking will also be checked. Students will only be assessed on content that they have covered over the school year. Question papers, the mini tests, which could be from previous exams, will be sent to schools before the Easter holidays and can be taken anytime before 18th of June. And by 18th of June, schools have to submit grades to exam board. And the teachers will be able to tell students about the evidence that is being used in calculating the final grade, but they will not be able to tell the students their final grade because, again, those grades are going to be checked by the exam boards, and they have the power to downgrade or upgrade results based on previous school performances as well. So they're going to check against previous school performances. They will check against the evidences that have been provided, and they will moderate that. Exam boards will be working together to ensure that requirements for internal and external quality assurance arrangements are consistent nationally, because the exam boards are tasked to maintain the grade inflation. So exam boards will be putting in place arrangements for external QA to check each center's internal QA process in a sample of centers to review the evidence for one or more subjects. My take on it is that they're going to be very rigorous and robust in their checks because, again, their biggest task is maintaining grade inflation. So for that reason, they have to be really robust. So students must not assume that they will be awarded soft grades like last year. What do I mean by soft grades is there was a government U-turn, and because of the government U-turn, everybody achieved the results that was set by the teachers, but bearing in mind that centers had to still follow a certain process, and that process was then using algorithms and using ranking. This year, it's not using algorithm, but apart from not using algorithm, they are assessing based on exam questions that's set by the exam board. They're going to have to be tested as for the whole cohort, not just individual students, and they will still be looking at schools' previous performances. So based on that, students must not assume that they're going to be getting this U-turn. There will be no U-turn this year because the government has effectively given the power to the exam boards and Office of Qualification. So for that reason, there's going to be that level of degree of robustness compared to last year. Not enough for the top universities, but at least better than last year in terms of robustness. So therefore, it's very important to make sure that students are well prepared for this. So it goes without saying that this news does not give GCSE and A-level students a free pass to down tools and codes throughout the rest of the year. It's quite the opposite, in fact. So because of the robustness and the rigor that the exam boards are going to be placing this year compared to last year, it's very important that students don't assume that there is going to be an easy ride. With exam boards ensuring the integrity of the grading system for the internally assessed papers, the pressure is really on for students to ensure that they must be working hard towards achieving the best they possibly can in their internal assessments, whatever the internal assessments may be. Now, schools may also be putting into more than one internal assessments. At OIC, for example, we're doing 3 sets of internal assessments to be able to showcase the best evidences that we can for the students, and therefore some schools may be doing the same thing. Or you may have one major internal assessment, and if that is the case, then that again has to be the evidence for the whole cohort. So you are still working towards some form of exam. This means that for year 11 and year 13 students, in order to achieve good teacher assessed grades, students must perform consistently, from now until the calculated grades are submitted to the exam board. So whatever assessments that the schools have put in place, they must be doing well consistently. So the key word here is consistently, because some schools might be using statistical analysis to be able to utilize, to be able to provide those evidences. Some schools may be just using one assessment. Some schools may be looking at multiple assessments. So there are 3 types of category. You've got statistical analysis of results throughout the year. Some schools might be using that. You also have assessments that you could do, one single assessment that you could do, or you could do a couple of assessments, multiple of assessments that schools can be doing between now and 18th of June. So there are many formats of evidences that can be used. And it could be a combination as well. So at OIC, we're doing combination, but in different schools will have different way of assessing students. But what's important is key is that the exam boards are providing exam questions for schools to use. So effectively, those exam questions would be what you would get in a past paper, or in what would be in a normal year in an examination as well. So again, training for those skills for answering questions in an exam is very important. Students can influence the final teacher assessment by demonstrating their dedication and diligence to each of their subjects, and to demonstrate evidence of academic progress every week, maximizing their performance in each class, as well as performing well in all internal mocks and mini tests set by the exam boards. So again, if students work consistently for their whatever work that they need to do in class, as well as assessments. What we must not forget is that students normally peak at different times of the year. Not every child is consistent. And some students peak at the end. I know I've seen students who have C, D, E grades in September, and they get A's and A stars in the summer. And that is normal, because that's how, that depends on how good an educator is to trigger those changes in a child, in a student. And I have seen many of those students who have done very well towards the end of the year, and they peak towards the end of the year. So therefore, it's, whatever situation the students are in, whether they have been consistent, that's fantastic. They must continue to be consistent. If they haven't been consistent, then this is the time, the next few weeks, to really showcase their strength within the assessments, whether they are using assessments from the exam board or they're using their own school assessments. It doesn't matter. They have to do well in their internal assessments, and that's going to be key. So how can OIC help